So a few weeks ago, one of the largest private equity firms in the world sold about a $750 million company. And it was a pretty standard deal, except for the fact that the entire deal was done with the help of AI. Now, the entire data room, all the management, facilitating the data room, was all done through a chatbot. So now this brings us back to the question that everyone continues asking: should I still do investment banking in 2026? So we're going to go ahead and answer that question. There's three ways that I see this playing out over the next few years. The career is going to change quite a bit, but long story short, there's actually a lot of good that's going to come out of this. Now, before we actually get into what's going to happen to the actual career, or at least what I think is going to happen to the actual career, and then also what you can do to prepare for that, let's go ahead and actually talk about what happened. What did CVC, the private equity firm here, actually do, and how was AI used to manage this entire process? Again, the firm here is CVC Capital Partners. They manage about $200 billion. They're one of the biggest names in European private equity. The company they sold is called Scrouts. It's a Greek e-commerce marketplace, roughly about 9,000 merchants and 12 million products listed. There's about 2.5 million active users today. So the price for the business was about 635 million euros, and that's around $750 million, which includes debt. Now, CVC would hire a bank, either Goldman, Morgan Stanley, or some elite boutique. That bank would build the marketing materials, run the auction, coordinate the buyer questions, and manage the process from first outreach to signing. That's really the bread and butter, and that's what's considered sell-side M&A, and that's how things have always worked in the past. So CVC just skipped all of that. Here's how the actual process worked, according to the Wall Street Journal. Step one: instead of a physical SIM, potential buyers received a link. That link went to an AI-powered data portal that acted like the investment memo. All the standard content, company overview, financials, market positioning, growth story, packaged as an interactive digital experience rather than just a 100-page PDF. Step two, the data room itself was AI managed. So buyers can search inside the data room, they can pull documents, cross-reference materials and financials. They do not have to wait for a junior banker to upload the next folder. Next, there was a chatbot analyst that started answering buyer questions. So this is really the Q&A that takes up most of the time from an analyst. So when the buyer goes through the financials, the materials, they always have questions. Those questions are typically fielded through the analyst, and that takes a lot of time to go ahead and answer those questions because you have to go up the chain, you have to work with your associate, your VP to also focus on the proper messaging. Well, that kind of all got cut short. So if someone asks, walk me through Q3 revenue by segment, what's the churn rate on this cohort? Can you reconcile the working capital line? That all got handled through the chatbot, and that was all done in real time. So 24 hours a day, anytime, if the bidder had a question, that can all get fielded through the chatbot. Finally, when a buyer wants to actually talk to a human, the chatbot didn't try to answer. It actually prompted them to reach out to management directly. So the human interaction that did happen went straight from the buyer to Scrouts' leadership team. There was no banker that was in the middle of this process, at least for fielding diligence questions and submitting the documents in the data room. So if you're asking yourself, should I still do banking in 2026, or what is this job even going to look like? Let's talk about it. So I did banking in about 2021, 2022. That's when I first got into banking. And the job is much more different now, especially with everything going on. Now, the big picture to actually keep in mind here is this isn't just unique to banking. This is happening in every career. Engineering is or at least software engineering is practically dwindling down. There's just a lot less software engineers that are needed. Now, even if you look at any other career too, if you look at big law, a lot of that work is also getting streamlined by AI as well. This is nothing new to banking. So the big point to also keep in mind is that the actual rewards are changing as well. So the actual competition is increasing for these jobs. Private equity, which is a big reason why people even want to get into banking, is becoming more and more competitive, and it's more difficult to even get into now. The reason why private equity is getting so competitive is because there's so many different private equity firms. And so even if you wanted to do private equity as an exit opportunity, even that reward or that career is becoming less opportunistic as it once used to be. Let's think about how the job is different if you go ahead and apply AI. So when you look at the CVC process, what actually changed? So when you think about an analyst jobs, I would really see it in two different ways. One, you have to put together the materials, the marketing materials, 90 pages of a presentation, describe a business. That takes a lot of time from the analyst. As an analyst, you also have to field the data room together, all the documents required to get put into the data room, and then they're going to go ahead and get questioned by buyers. All that stuff is done through an analyst. Now, we all know the one thing that can't probably get replaced is the actual relationship. So the banker that had the relationship with the contacts at Blackstone that brought in the business and brought in the bidder to go ahead and bid on CVC's asset here, Scrouts. So that whole relationship piece of this is still intact, but we all already knew that. So what now actually happens to the analyst position going forward in 27, 28, 29? So there's three scenarios of what actually happens to an analyst's career now. One, nothing changes. Everything just stays how it is and keeps going forward. This is the most unlikely scenario, and we can see time and time again, the career itself changes dramatically. So just historically speaking, the few that we can think of is when Excel was introduced, when you had electronic data rooms, those all changed the career dramatically. This is not the first time, and I think it's easy to get focused on the fact that it is dramatic because we haven't really seen much. But if you talk to bankers that are now 50, 60 years old, this isn't dramatic relative to the longer timeline of things. So with the addition of all those new pieces, the career always changed, but still somehow analysts continue working 90, 100 hours a week. So the work necessarily didn't get any more efficient. Scenario two, and this is what I think is the base case, and ultimately what is going to end up happening, the analyst classes get smaller. Let's go ahead and just quickly establish scenario three as well before I confirm why I think scenario two is the most likely. Scenario three is analyst classes just get wiped out entirely. Now, the interesting thing about this is we already see that structure in place in another part of finance, which is private equity. There are no analysts in private equity. Well, I guess except for the larger private equity firms, which do have smaller analyst classes. Most private equity firms do not have analyst classes. It just starts at the associate, then you have your VP, and then typically an MD running the deal as well. There's typically one other personnel as well on this deal, for larger PE firms especially, but that is the typical structure. There is no analyst. Now, it is possible that that same structure takes place in banking as well with the introduction of AI, especially if it's good enough to the point where a lot of the marketing materials and data room facilitation is able to just be done through AI. You remove the analyst entirely. Here's why, so that's scenario three, and here's why I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. Because largely the reason why banks do bring in analyst classes is to promote talent and to continue advancing the funnel and identifying high caliber talent that can continue to lead the firm. Now, yes, it's great that you can have an analyst do a lot of the grunt work, but through that process, you're able to identify candidates that really excel at what they do and are qualified to lead the firm in the future. Analyst recruiting is obviously important to get work done, but you still need analysts to advance the future of the company. Now, that brings us back to scenario two. Analyst classes just get cut. And that is probably the unfortunate reality of this, is you don't need as many analysts, but with that being said, you are going to have one analyst that is able to do a lot more. One analyst can probably get put on more deals, and so will the analyst's work hours actually decrease? Maybe, maybe not, because now that the analyst is more efficient, they're probably just going to get put on more deals. So a typical analyst when I was in banking would work on 2, maybe 3 deals at a time. If 2 of those deals are already live deals, that takes up a majority of your time because you have to put together marketing materials, you have to go ahead and manage the data room. That all takes a bunch of time. Now, if this is all done through AI, an analyst can probably work on more like 4 or 5, maybe even 6, depending on how good the AI gets. Now, here's the part that might be a bit more of a hot take. I think in the short to medium term, an analyst career actually gets better. It becomes a pretty desirable career because the one major detractor of this career is the work hours and the horror stories that you hear. But within the short to medium term, I think that the actual work that an analyst is doing is actually declining because what used to take 2 hours now takes 20 minutes with the help of AI, especially if you're using these tools like Rogo, if you're using custom GPTs. If you can actually get good with that, then the work drastically decreases, at least the time it took you to do a specific task. Now, I think in the longer term, that's going to be accounted for because you will get put on more deals. But in the short to medium term, while you're still working on the same amount of deals and still doing the same amount of tasks, those same tasks just become easier to do and quicker to do. Well, what you now have to do, and this is pretty much mandatory for anyone that is looking to get into a career in banking, is you have to learn the AI tools down. Now, this means if your firm's already using a platform like Rogo, then you have to get very comfortable with that. ChatGPT for financial workflows, custom GPTs for various tasks as well, whatever your bank really rolls out. Now, the analysts who actually become really good with these tools in the next 12 months are probably going to be the ones who end up compounding the benefits that they end up receiving. And it's difficult for an analyst to still continue to excel if you don't get very good with some of these tools. So the banking career that you're going to be getting into in 2026 or 2027 is very different than what I did and what many others did previously. The nature of the job is going to change, but the overall structure is probably going to be somewhat similar. Nothing's going to shift dramatically, but the most important thing is the way you operate is going to be different. There's going to be a few different skills that are necessary for what an analyst is going to have to do to succeed in the future. Now, that really all just starts with getting more advanced with the AI tools that are in front of you, and we'll probably plan on making a few more videos of those as well in the future. Thanks.